Full story of Sagat leading into Street Fighter 6 will work for vengeance 復讐のために、働きます。どういうこと？ちょっと仕事なくなってませんか？サガットさん。エンペラー・オブ・ムエタイサガット。サガットはしばしば、金王様として例えられますが、どういうことなの？ストリートファイター？あ、サガットのストーリーじゃん。Said eye injury caused the young Sagat to realize this chaotic approach to fighting wasn't working. サガットは目を怪我したことによって、若い時にね、目を怪我したことによって戦いに対して、考え方が変わったと。それからムエタイを練習するようになったんだね。あれでもさ、サガットの目を傷つけたのはダンの親父っていう説あったよね。そう、あった。胸の傷は竜に昇竜拳でつけられたんだけど、あったよね。で、彼の若い時の、この教えから、彼は成長して、7フィート半、226センチだね。サガット。226センチを誇るベーマスになったんです。ベーマス。これはバハムートとかベヒーモスとか言われてますけど、ベーマスです。私の発音は。7フィート半のベーマスになって、サガットは15歳の時に、もう15歳の時にベーマスになってたの？それは身長高いね。で、チャンピオンになったと。ってことは目の怪我をしたのってそんなに前なの？ダンの親父マジ極悪非道かよ。こんな子供の目を奪いやがって。次なんか出てくる おじさんキャラ、なんかダンの親父とか出てきそうじゃない？ダンじゃなくて。で、ちょっと待って、なんか書いてある。ダンの。待って、そして、16歳になって、16歳になった時に、内なる怒り。Proceed to summon a power。召喚する。彼の非常に速いタイガーショット飛び道具を、使えるようになったんですって。で、Killing his masked opponent。彼のマスクをされた、対戦相手を殺してしまうんです。Who by the way would up being Go 響。あれ ?16 歳の時に響ダンと戦ったってこと？じゃあ、目の視力を奪ったのは響ダンじゃないんじゃない？ 16 歳の時になんか倒したって書いてあるよ。親父は一撃で血の海に沈めたとサガッと言うてた。じゃあ2試合目だったのかなこれ。いや、郷響のはまだ出てきてないから実力気になるんだよね。強かったのかな。で、サガットはワールドチャンピオンだったにもかかわらず、ヌアカンという名前の男がムエタイの皇帝の座は持っていましたと。で、その後、サガットはその男を、倒しました。で、アドンは、この時のサガットに憧れを抱いていますと。ストリートファイター1は、このようになるほどね。サガットといえばね、タイの涅槃像が、アユタヤ遺跡なのかなあれ。後ろにでっかい、なんていうのあれ誰なんていうのあれ、ブッダなのかな？神様じゃないよね、あれ。大仏様か。And get his second physical reminder. His trademark chest scar. ここね。ネシャカか。で、なんで、今更、サガッとまとめた？
The original boss of the Street Fighter franchise is often and understandably mistaken as Street Fighter II's M. Bison, but the final and frustratingly overpowered challenge from the very first Street Fighter game was none other than the Emperor of Muay Thai, Sagat. The final Street Fighter II's M. Bison, but the final and frustratingly overpowered challenge from the very first Street Fighter game was none other than the Emperor of Muay Thai, Sagat.
I guess you didn't see that,
ラウルジュリアだ。
did you?
あ
Though he started his career as a main antagonist, Sagat would actually go through more of an arc than most other Street Fighter characters. He was demoted to sub-boss status in Street Fighter II and evolved further during the alpha days, from being an all-out baddie to showing early signs of perhaps becoming one of the good guys. Sagat's history is an especially interesting one as he wrestles with relatable inner demons that Capcom expertly depicts through clever symbolism, and the fact that he's a towering and battle-torn badass surely helps add to the charisma factor. From before SF1 all the way up into current day and potentially beyond, here's the full story of Sagat leading into Street Fighter 6.
これあれだ。
Sagat, who is often referred to simply as the King, the current day, the fact that he's a towering and battle-torn badass surely helps add to the charisma factor. From before SF1 all the way up into current day and potentially beyond, here's the...
これね、確かこの後とんでもないことが起きます。サガットが出てきて、新キャラですよ。DLC キャラ。サガットが出てきて、とんでもないことが起こる。覚えてますか皆さん。これはっきり覚えてるわ。クイズ出したいぐらい。この後で新キャラで出てきたサガットが、真っ赤ってきて、なんと、竜の昇竜拳ですっ飛ばされます。出てくるキャラクターだよ。DLC キャラクターで。普通はサガットが竜をやっつけるはずじゃん。新キャラなんだもん。
Here's the full story of Sagat.
これ確かにここでそう昇竜拳にサガットやられた気がするんだよな。
Sagat, who is often referred to simply as the King, was a natural fighter from youth as he would constantly get into brawls out in the streets of Thailand.
もう一回見えないか
But
な。
with no real direction or understanding, these brawls would leave him bloodied, battered, and eventually with a weakened right eye. Said eye injury caused a young Sagat to realize this chaotic approach to fighting wasn't working, and so he decided to hone his aggression through the practice of Muay Thai. Growing through his early lessons and into a 7.5-foot-tall behemoth, Sagat became a world champion at the tender age of 15. 1 year later, during his annual title defense, Sagat was challenged by a masked fighter who refused to offer up his name. The two fought, and upon realizing Sagat's eye was a weak point, the fighter pinpointed all of his attacks right at it, eventually gouging it out completely. This enraged 16-year-old Sagat, who would give in to his immediate anger and proceed. This pinpointed all of his attacks right at it, eventually gouging.
は？ダン。あ、これだ。ダンの親父だ。見た目ダンだ。で、目が。
Gouging it out completely. This enraged 16-year-old Sagat, who would give in to his immediate anger and proceed to summon a power from deep within to launch his very first Tiger Shot projectile, killing his masked opponent, who, by the way, would end up being Go Hibiki, father of Dan. Though Sagat was the world champion, the title of Emperor of Muay Thai belonged to a man named Nuakan, whom Sagat would later defeat and thus garner the title. An onlooking Adon was inspired by this and asked to become Sagat's pupil, which Sagat obliged. This all brings us to the events of Street Fighter 1. The King is basically the guy to beat in the competitive fighting world, but rumors of an up-and-coming martial artist are beginning to circulate in Thailand. Indeed, said martial artist is Street Fighter poster boy Ryu, who defeats numerous other challengers to gain the right to face Sagat. Though Sagat is initially winning their bout, and all but defeated Ryu taps into the dark Satsui no Hado energy and ultimately defeats Sagat with a gnarly Shoryuken that leaves the Emperor of Muay Thai with his second physical trademark, his massive chest scar. This defeat and its physical reminder send Sagat into an anger spiral as he makes getting revenge on Ryu the entirety of his focus. Next, on to the Street Fighter Alpha series. Sagat's pupil Adon is furious at his master's loss and deems him a tiger who has lost his fangs. Adon berates and leaves Sagat, and Sagat in turn leaves his Muay Thai community entirely and begins training alone, eventually developing an attack meant to rival Ryu's Shoryuken, the Tiger Blow. Now armed with this fancy new uppercut, Sagat finds himself without the resources to hunt his foe down, until he encounters the evil criminal organization, Shadaloo, and its leader, M. Bison. Bison offers Sagat the necessary resources to pursue Ryu in exchange for his acting as the dictator's personal bodyguard. Sagat indeed encounters Ryu and fights him, despite Ryu claiming that Sagat is not yet fully recovered from their first duel, perhaps pointing more to his maturity and understanding of fighting than to his physical state. The king wins, but feels like something is off and later realizes that Ryu lost the fight on purpose. This pisses him off even further, and he refines the tiger blow into the dreaded tiger uppercut. Bison captures and brainwashes Ryu as part of his plan to harness the world's most powerful fighters, and then offers him to Sagat to defeat once again. The pair begin fighting, but Sagat isn't down with facing this sort of alternate version of Ryu and decides to help the young fighter break free from Bison's mind bullets. After coming to, Ryu drives Bison away, and Sagat realizes that the power of hatred and the fuel that vengeance offers are both very limited, and decides that he must defeat Ryu not for revenge, but to fulfill his own destiny. As a bit of a side story during Alpha, Sagat also encounters and fights Dan Hibiki, who is more or less a terrible fighter but is also on a revenge trek since Sagat killed his father Go. The king is fully on his spiritual journey to becoming a better person at this point and actually lets Dan win, unbeknownst to Dan, not unlike the way Ryu allowed him to win.
You win, Lupe!
Daigo needs to get on that return ticket!
You're the best,
Lupe! A return!
That brings us to the Street Fighter II spot on the timeline. Now, unfortunately, the story wasn't really fleshed out when this game launched and was sort of written later on, but for our purposes, there are two important things that happened during this game. One, Sagat completely cuts ties with Shadaloo, and two, he doesn't win the World Tournament, which more or less devolves once everyone realizes Bison is trying to take over the world. Things get much more fleshed out in Street Fighter IV, which occurs on the timeline after SF2. Now, having failed to win the World Warrior Tournament, Sagat becomes depressed.
You are one pathetic loser.
He seeks out Adon in search of something to reignite his spirit and is instantly mocked when he encounters his very egotistical former student. He easily beasts on Adon, and this makes him feel better, so much so that he's once again up to the challenge of participating in yet another World Warrior Tournament with the hopes of encountering Ryu. As luck would have it, Shadaloo's subsidiary, Sin, is putting on exactly such an event. The two do indeed find each other and battle, but we have no idea what happens except that Sagat leaves their match finally free of his obsession with fighting Ryu. He comes to the realization that instead of focusing on victory or defeat, what's truly important is communicating one's soul to the opponent through one's fists. He heads back to Thailand to visit his home village where he's 30 times the size of everyone else. Oh my gosh! And that's the end of Street Fighter IV. Sagat is not part of Street Fighter V's main A Shadow Falls storyline, as he was added as a DLC character a few years after the game dropped. Now that said, he does have some personal development during the SF5 prologue stories. Apparently, some of the Satsui no Hado energy from the Shoryuken when he landed all the way back in SF1 was transferred into Sagat. As such, he's tormented by the hallucination of a demonic imp that urges him to kill the people in his village. He overcomes these urges without harming anyone and realizes that this is the dark power Ryu had been wrestling with all those years ago, and this is what lashed out and gave him his iconic scar. This realization is the final piece of the puzzle that allows Sagat total peace with his journey thus far. The final image of his story tells us that he's embarking on loftier goals worthy of the name The King, and that's the last we've officially seen of Sagat in the games. So what might Capcom do with Sagat if they were to bring him into Street Fighter VI as DLC, which they absolutely should? Comment below and give one of the many reasons why Sagat should be in Season 2 ASAP. The character is rife with symbolism and themes that we should consider. The ability to see and to perceive is so important that many cultures throughout history have made vision a prominent thematic element of many different gods. Indeed, things don't tend to go well for Sagat when he restricts his focus and fails to see the big picture. Recall his very first injury was to his eye, and that came about because he was simply brawling without much purpose or direction. His second major injury was also to his eye, as Go realized Sagat's weakness, which you could call his blind spot, and capitalized on it. Sagat fully loses his eye this time, but does not learn his lesson as he continues to see fighting primarily as a means of expressing anger. Things get worse for him when he later loses to Ryu and gets his second physical reminder of his lacking ability to pay balanced attention to all aspects of the fight. Still, instead of learning, he goes all in on and is fully consumed by his one-track goal of revenge. Sagat figuratively lacks vision and becomes blinded literally as a result. He slowly but surely begins to see the full picture thanks to his encounters with Ryu, whose name and Shoryuken technique are representative of the dragon. In East Asian culture, the dragon and the tiger are often juxtaposed as dualistic rivals. Where the dragon represents the heavens, the spirit, Eastern culture, and the yang, the tiger represents earth, physical matter, the west, and the yin. Sagat's exposure to and ongoing dialogue with Ryu broadens his horizons and widens his vision. Recall how he even develops one of his iconic moves after being inspired by Ryu's uppercut, thus turning him into a more actualized and balanced version of himself. Though he was heavily featured in Street Fighter Alpha, Capcom hasn't done much with Sagat in terms of main storylines ever since. They've more or less resolved his main obstacles and could do pretty much whatever with him now. Ryu has overcome his personal demons in finding balance and properly integrating the Satsui no Hado into his fighting style and being, and it would be awesome to see these two meet up in their ascended forms, so to speak. Capcom could have them clash for old time's sake, but then perhaps have them team up to face a common enemy, especially if said enemy was M. Bison. What if Akuma and Bison temporarily teamed up and wound up in an epic 2v2 with Ryu and Sagat? To call back to his thematic evolution, perhaps Sagat could be the one who sees the weakness when things appear impossibly bleak. Really, we just want to start throwing out some tiger shots, knees, and uppercuts in Street Fighter 6, and whatever story Capcom tacks on is more or less a bonus. We have a whole playlist of these character story recaps for you to enjoy, including that of M. Bison, Akuma, Juri, Chun-Li, Ken, Cammy, and plenty of others. If you were informed or entertained by this video, please leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more. I've been John Velociraptor Guerrero for Event Hubs. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.
ありがとうございました。サガットのストーリー、なんとなくわかりました。スト6でもね、まあいつか出てくると信じて、まあ、出てきそうだけどね。まあでもこうしてキャラクターの背景をちゃんと知れると、なんて言うんだろう、使いたいなって思いますよね。サガットはね、スト3以外は出てますね。スト2、スト4、5。そういう意味で言うと、本当に皆勤賞なのは、龍拳チュンリーぐらいじゃない？